Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at a single source, but it's a powerful one.
Definitely packs a punch.
We're talking about Season 6, Episode 9 of the Honest Bunch podcast, specifically Gehgeh's journey.
This one really stayed with me.
Me too.
Yeah.
At first glance, it might seem like a familiar story, tough upbringing, turning point, happy ending.
Yeah, you think you've heard it all before.
Right, but Gehgeh's story goes so much deeper. It really got me thinking about how we define stability and purpose and how those things aren't always what they seem.
Absolutely. It challenges our assumptions about success and what a meaningful life really looks like.
Yeah, and the podcast host does not hold back on the details of Gehgeh's early life.
Right. They paint a very raw and honest picture.
We're talking about real hardship, even a period of living on the streets.
Yeah, it's tough to hear, but it makes their eventual turnaround all the more powerful.
Okay, so we've got this really difficult starting point, but then there's this turning point, a pivotal moment that kind of sets everything in motion. And it all starts with something you might not expect, a community gardening program.
Oh, now you've got my attention gardening, huh?
Yeah, on the surface, it might seem simple.
Right. Like, how much can a garden really change your life?
But for Gehgeh, this becomes so much more than just planting seeds.
So spill the beans. What happens next?
Well, Gehgeh describes this gardening program as a space where they not only learned practical skills, but also felt a sense of belonging, a feeling of being valued for what they could contribute.
Okay, so it's not just about learning a garden. It's about finding a community.
Exactly. It's about feeling seen and appreciated, which can be incredibly powerful for someone who's been through what Gehgeh has.
I can imagine, but we have to acknowledge that people struggling with instability often face systemic barriers too.
Absolutely. It's not always as simple as finding the right program.
Right, sometimes access is limited, or the environment isn't safe, or maybe there's just a lack of awareness about available resources.
And that's what makes Gehgeh's story so compelling. They acknowledge those systemic challenges, but also emphasize the power of individual agency.
So it's about taking ownership even within a system that often feels stacked against you.
Exactly. It wasn't just about what the program offered, but how Gehgeh chose to engage with it. They were actively seeking change, and that internal shift was crucial.
So this gardening program, it becomes more of a catalyst than a magic solution, right?
Precisely. And it's this proactive approach that we'll see echoed throughout Gehgeh's journey. They didn't passively wait for good things to happen. They actively sought them out, even in the most unlikely of places.
This reminds me of the research on self-efficacy, that belief in our own ability to achieve goals. Maybe finding that gardening program wasn't just luck, but Gehgeh putting themselves out there, open to opportunities, which in turn boosted their confidence.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It suggests that even small acts of agency can have a snowball effect on our self-belief and ultimately our ability to create positive change.
Okay, so we've got this pivotal moment, this internal shift towards taking control. But what does that actually look like in Gehgeh's daily life? Did they suddenly become a gardening guru overnight?
Not quite. Gehgeh's all about small, consistent changes. It's not about overnight transformations, but rather a series of intentional choices that compound over time.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but I need specifics. What areas did Gehgeh actually focus on to create this change?
They mention three key areas: education, relationships, and finding a purpose. Each of these becomes a building block in their journey towards stability.
Okay, hold on now. You can't just leave us hanging like that. We're gonna have to dive deeper into those specifics in part 2.
Fair enough. But I think it's important to pause here for a moment and appreciate what we've learned so far.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Even though we haven't even gotten to Gehgeh's success yet, they're already challenging our definition of it.
Right. It's not just about material wealth or status, but this internal sense of agency and progress.
It's about defining success on your own terms.
Exactly. And that's a key takeaway for our listeners, too. Transformation isn't a destination, it's an ongoing journey. It's about those daily choices, those small acts of courage and resilience that ultimately shape who we become.
Welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. We're picking up where we left off with Gehgeh's journey, and that focus on small, consistent changes.
Yeah, those tiny steps that add up to something big.
Right, and remember, they mentioned those 3 key areas: education, relationships, and purpose. So let's break those down, starting with education.
Okay, sounds good.
What does education look like in Gehgeh's world? Because it doesn't sound like they're talking about traditional schooling.
You're right on that it's definitely not your typical classroom setting.
So are we talking about like self-directed learning?
Exactly. Gehgeh talks about learning carpentry from a neighbor, picking up knowledge about native plants through the gardening program, even attending free workshops at the local library.
Oh, wow. So it's like a DIY approach to education.
Totally. It's about
Yeah.
piecing together your own learning journey based on your needs and interests.
I love that. It's like they're saying you don't need a fancy degree to be a lifelong learner.
Right. And it also speaks to Gehgeh's proactive mindset. They weren't waiting for someone to hand them an education. They were creating their own opportunities.
And, it reminds me of Malcolm Gladwell's idea of the 10,000-hour rule. It's not always about formal instruction, but about dedicated practice and a willingness to learn.
That's such a great connection, and it really highlights Gehgeh's dedication to growth.
Okay, so we've covered education. Let's move on to relationships. This seems especially important considering Gehgeh's early experiences with instability.
Definitely. And this is where Gehgeh emphasizes the idea of unlearning.
Unlearning.
Yeah, like letting go of certain behaviors or defense mechanisms that might have been necessary for survival in the past, but are actually holding them back from building healthy relationships.
Oh, I see. It's like they had to unlearn some of those survival tactics in order to truly connect with others.
Precisely. And Gehgeh talks about intentionally surrounding themselves with people who embody the qualities they want to cultivate in themselves: patience, kindness, a growth mindset.
So it's about building a support system that encourages positive change.
Exactly. It's like building a positive feedback loop where you're constantly surrounded by people who are lifting you up and inspiring you to grow.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're always around negativity, it's going to be harder to break free from those patterns.
Right. You become a reflection of your environment to some extent.
Okay, so education is about taking control of your learning relationships, or about surrounding yourself with the right people. And then there's this idea of purpose.
Ah, yes. Purpose, the big one.
This feels like the driving force behind a lot of Gehgeh's transformation, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating how Gehgeh's sense of purpose emerges organically from those earlier building blocks: education and relationships.
So it's not like they had this grand plan all along.
No, it seems to have unfolded naturally through their experiences.
Tell me more.
Well, through their self-directed learning, Gehgeh discovers this passion for sustainable living practices. And then through their community connections, they realize that this passion can be shared. It can actually make a difference in the lives of others.
So the purpose isn't just something they find, it's something they create through their actions and their connections.
Exactly. It's like all these pieces of their life are coming together to form a bigger picture.
And what's even more inspiring is that Gehgeh doesn't keep this purpose to themselves. They actually start putting it into action.
Oh, absolutely. They talk about launching a small initiative in their community, teaching people about composting, gardening, simple ways to live more sustainably.
It's like they're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk and inspiring others to join them.
And that brings us to a really crucial point. Individual transformation can have a ripple effect. It can impact the community and ultimately society as a whole.
Okay, so now we're zooming out from Gehgeh's personal journey to this broader perspective of social change.
Right? We've got this incredible story of individual growth, but it's also a story about how those individual changes can contribute to something much larger.
I'm ready to explore that. Let's dive into the ripple effect of Gehgeh's transformation and how their story connects to these bigger societal issues in part 3. Okay, so we're back and ready to unpack this idea of Gehgeh's transformation rippling outward into something bigger.
Right? It's not just about them, it's about the impact they're having on their community.
And beyond, right, we were just talking about how Gehgeh connects their personal growth to these larger societal issues.
Yeah, they seem to understand that while personal resilience is important, it's not always enough to overcome systemic obstacles.
So they're pushing for a system that actually supports everyone's growth, not just those who manage to beat the odds.
It's like they're saying, look, I made it, but I had to fight tooth and nail. Imagine what we could accomplish if the system wasn't working against us.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But how does that translate into action?
Well, Gehgeh starts small by organizing workshops in their community.
Teaching people those practical skills they learned.
Yeah, things like basic gardening and composting.
So they're literally planting seeds, but it sounds like they're also planting seeds of knowledge and empowerment.
Exactly. And they don't stop there. Gehgeh goes on to partner with local schools.
Oh, wow. Tell me more about that.
They helped create a program where students learn to grow their own food.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's about teaching kids not just about gardening, but also about nutrition and environmental stewardship.
It's like they're building a more sustainable future from the ground up.
And it's not just about the kids, either. Gehgeh also works with formerly incarcerated individuals.
Oh, wow. So they're reaching out to some of the most vulnerable members of the community.
Exactly. And they focus on providing practical skills training in things like urban farming.
to help them find stable employment and reintegrate into society.
It's all about empowering people to build better lives for themselves.
I'm really seeing this pattern of taking personal experience and using it to create positive change for others.
It's a powerful example of how individual transformation can ripple outward and become a catalyst for collective action.
You know, this reminds me of the concept of social entrepreneurship using business principles to address social problems.
That's a great analogy. Gehgeh isn't running a business in the traditional sense, but they're applying that same innovative problem-solving approach.
To these really complex societal issues.
And they're proving that change is possible, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the big question is, what does Gehgeh's story mean for our listeners? How can we take this inspiration and turn it into action in our own lives?
Well, I think the key takeaway is that each of us has the power to make a difference, no matter how small it may seem.
It starts with that commitment to personal growth, like we saw in Gehgeh.
And then it's about finding those areas where our passions align with the needs of our communities.
Maybe it's volunteering or mentoring or even just having those tough conversations about the issues that matter most to us.
It's about recognizing that our individual actions contribute to a collective effort.
Like those tiny tiles in a mosaic, each piece is important to the overall picture.
So as we end this conversation, I'd like to leave our listeners with a question. What's your mosaic going to look like? What small step can you take today to build a life of purpose and contribute to a better world?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. And remember, even the most incredible journeys start with a single step.